자, 이제 다음 세션으로 한번 넘어가 보도록 하겠습니다. 이번 세션에서 다룰 주제는 레이어 1 그리고 2입니다. 먼저 샬디움의 헤드 오브 펀드레이징 앤 에코시스템이신 그레고리 해머님께서 퓨처 오브 레이어 1, 레이어 2를 주제로 발표를 해주시겠습니다. 무대 위로 모시겠습니다.
Got it. Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Over the next remainder of this decade, we believe that Web3 will reach its first billion users. Today, I'm excited to discuss with you the future of Layer 1 and Layer 2 blockchains, which will innovate and scale to onboard these users. My name is Greg. I'm the head of ecosystem and fundraising at Shardium, an upcoming EVM-based Layer 1 focused on retaining low fees forever, no matter how many transactions there are, using dynamic state sharding. Our co-founder Nishal Shetty is the founder and CEO of the largest centralized exchange in India, WizierX. While operating WizierX, Nishal recognized that most users were not withdrawing their assets to blockchains due to price sensitivity and the high cost of transaction fees. This gave Nishal the vision to launch a smart contract platform that could keep fees low, no matter how many transactions there are, to onboard users in emerging markets and make decentralization affordable. We're backed by over 50 investors, such as Struck Crypto, a $100 million Web3 seed fund, Jane Street, one of the largest market makers in the world, Big Brain Holdings, one of the largest whales in Solana, and one of the most active investors in Web3, Foresight Ventures, one of the upcoming Web3 seed funds from Southeast Asia, and the partner of BitGet and BitKeep, DFG, JSquare, WeMix, CoinGecko, and Spartan. All of these investors have backed us to support our vision to make decentralization affordable in emerging markets. While the excitement for investing in Bitcoin and crypto on spot markets is fantastic, I think it's important to understand that we're still extremely early to the adoption of decentralization. If you combine Bitcoin, Ethereum, Polygon, and BNB Chain on their busiest day combined in usage, they haven't surpassed 350 TPS in adoption. While Google and WhatsApp are averaging 6 to 7 figures of TPS. And so we all envision a world where decentralized applications go mainstream. And the challenge is, how do these decentralized applications and blockchains scale to handle 6 to 7 figures of throughput? So before we discuss the future of blockchains, I think it's important to acknowledge the current blockchain technology that exists today and the challenges they face. We continuously go through the same story over and over again since Ethereum has launched. A new blockchain emerges. At first, it has low transaction fees and fast transactions. And then as it continues to grow its community and gain popularity, it quickly becomes congestion as they hit their TPS bottleneck and gas fees begin to rise. And global adoption of blockchain won't occur until this challenge is solved. The reason that blockchains are hitting scalability bottlenecks and getting rising gas fees is due to these scalability bottlenecks. The first scalability bottleneck is the CPU capacity limitation, where every blockchain needs to validate and execute every transaction. And the validation and execution happens at the CPU. And so blockchains are limited to the capacity of a CPU per given node. Once every transaction has been validated and executed, it needs to be gossiped to every node in the network. But there's only so much bandwidth available in the network to gossip a given number of transactions per second. And so blockchains are limited by their network input-output bottleneck, where there's only so much bandwidth available to gossip a given number of transactions per second. Finally, blockchains are limited by their disk I/O, where when every node sees every transaction and confirms every transaction, they need to write to the disk to update the state of the addresses involved in a transaction. And you can only write to a disk so many times per second. So you run into these three bottlenecks in a blockchain. And until we find ways to mitigate these solutions, we're going to continue to have this rising gas fee challenge. There are many different creative solutions coming out to find ways to mitigate these solutions, and most of these mechanisms fall into two categories of scaling. It's either vertical scaling or horizontal scaling. And if you look at blockchains today, most chains are trying to scale using vertical scaling. Vertical scaling just means using more powerful nodes to process transactions faster. So the pro of vertical scaling is that it's pretty easy. You just need to increase the resources of the nodes in your network, and it gives you faster processing. However, the cons are it only incrementally delays the amount of time it takes to run into your scalability bottlenecks and start having high gas fees and becoming congested. And it also results in centralization, where the more powerful nodes you use, the more high barriers to entry you have. As you use more powerful hardware to operate nodes, it becomes more expensive and less people can afford to operate these validator nodes. And so horizontal scaling ideally is the preferred way to scale a blockchain. What horizontal scaling means is instead of using more powerful nodes, you can now benefit from the additional validators joining your network and have parallel processing, where different nodes can process transactions in parallel. So you don't need to use more powerful nodes, you just can scale horizontally with each validator added to the network using sharding. The challenge here is that sharding is extremely complex to implement, and it also oftentimes breaks composability. So sharding hasn't really been done right in Web3 yet. Today, when we look at the layer 1 blockchains, layer 1s are responsible for consensus, execution, and data availability in a monolithic architecture. We're also seeing modular architectures come out where they're only responsible for one of these three functions. For example, there's a new modular blockchain coming out that's solely focused on data availability, and they push execution off to layer 2. And so when you look at the approaches to scaling at layer 1, most are focused on vertical scaling. They try to come up with some mechanism where the consensus remains decentralized, but execution goes somewhere that's centralized, like a layer 2 or a centralized group of execution nodes at layer 1. The goal of a layer 1 is to have greater decentralization and security, but most layer 1s are facing scalability challenges, and that's when execution gets pushed off to layer 2. And so when we look at layer 2s, you have different types of mechanisms that allow these layer 2s to retain decentralization of consensus, but they scale vertically at the execution layer, using more powerful nodes to process transactions faster off-chain, and then using a mechanism such as Plasma or sidechain, ZK rollups or optimistic rollups or Validium as the mechanism to retain decentralization of consensus at layer 1. And so we're exposing users to security risks at layer 2. And again, vertical scaling only incrementally delays the time it takes to run into this rising gas fee challenge. That's why we saw Polygon's gas fees rise to 50 cents in January of this year when one game became too popular, or Arbitrum's gas fees rise greater than Ethereum's in June. And so, it's impossible to predict what the future blockchain of society will be or what the top blockchains will be. We can't see the future, but we can understand the features that are needed for a blockchain to succeed and to make decentralization go mainstream. And I think the first feature is affordability. Here's a picture of India, and in India, people aren't going to pay more than 50 cents per transaction. And India is the largest democracy in the world. They have 1.3 billion people. They can really benefit from decentralization, but we need a blockchain that can scale and be able to onboard these users and retain low fees. So the blockchains of the futures need to be able to scale and keep fees low, especially in emerging markets where they're extremely price sensitive. In addition, I think one thing many people don't think about is how transactions are ordered and if the mechanism used to order transaction is fair or not. Today we have fee markets where users can bid on gas fees to prioritize their transaction first. And I've included a picture of a grocery store here because I like to think about this analogy where, if the world adopted blockchains today and everything was running on blockchains, what would we do when we go to a grocery store and everyone gets into this bidding war to see who can check out of the grocery store first? No one wants to live in a world where every time you go to purchase a product, you have to get in a bidding war and compete in a fee market to see who can check out first. We shouldn't be commoditizing, processing times. Transactions should be ordered based on time, not fee markets, and that would enable the fair ordering of transactions. Sustainability is a given. Proof of stake has achieved this, and we can pay close attention to other forms of consensus to, track any new consensus algorithms that are sustainable. I think a lot of people today don't realize that the blockchains they're using aren't truly decentralized. If you have blockchains that are scaling vertically or they're using delegated proof of stake and doxing their node operators, they're significantly sacrificing on decentralization. When you have vertical scaling and you only have a few validators, they can collude and take over the network. Or if you have a centralized authority that's approving node operators, they can collude because they know who every single node operator is, or a government could force them to reveal this information. And so to stand the test of time, blockchains need to be permissionless and have a high volume of decentralization by reducing the barriers to entry for node operators and keeping hardware requirements low. Blockchains in the future, there won't be one blockchain. We all know it'll be a multi-chain world, and there will be blockchains of blockchains. And so for these blockchains to communicate with each other, they need to be interoperable and support an interoperability standard such as IBC. Another important trait that the blockchains of the futures will retain is composability. And I think a lot of people today are sacrificing on composability to solve other challenges like scaling and using individual application-specific blockchains that fragment the network effect when they break composability, or even some of the recent sharded chains that break composability. Composability is an amazing characteristic that unsharded chains like Ethereum and Solana have, where you're able to benefit from the utility of other applications within one consensus. And so the blockchains of the future will be able to retain composability to maximize their network effect. And most importantly, we need to get to a time and place in Web3 where the user experience of dApps is 5 to 10 times greater than the user experience of Web2 applications to motivate users to start migrating to Web3 applications. We need to stop talking about things like decentralization and consensus and scaling mechanisms and start focusing on the benefit of Web3 applications. I'm really excited for the day that I can see my mother or my grandmother using a Web3 application because it does something like provide more convenience or lower cost to their life. And so the blockchains of the future need to abstract a lot of the complicated features that blockchains have today, like key management or signing in transactions. And so the blockchains of the future will achieve this and abstract these nuances that we have today. And so who wins? I think a lot of people are looking for the perfect investment and investing in the next top blockchain that is going to take Web3 mainstream. And I think the blockchains that are the future and become the most popular blockchains in the world are the chains that can sustain the largest network effect. A network effect is the total number of users in a network and the value derived from them. In blockchain, I also consider the developers and applications and service providers and investors in an ecosystem a part of this network effect as well. And so The goal of any blockchain is to achieve critical mass where the value of your network effect is greater than any other blockchain, and it becomes a dominant strategy to adopt your blockchain because no matter which other blockchain you can consider, the value of adopting this one chain that has achieved critical mass and has a greater network effect supersedes all of the other chains. And so the blockchains of the future will be able to scale and sustain the largest network effect. And I think that's why it's so important when we look at chains today. It's really important to think about how will they scale, because eventually they're going to, if they can't scale, they're going to run into scalability bottlenecks, start losing users, and once they achieve critical mass, any additional user is going to damage the user experience for every other user in the network. At Shardium, we're really excited to bring the most advanced sharding tech in Web3 to market. Our co-founder, Omar Syed, is one of the first webmasters at NASA. In 1996, NASA posted the first pictures of Mars on their website and became the most popular website in the world for a period of time. Omar was the first webmaster, or the webmaster that had to work with his team to scale their servers to handle that traffic. And over the 30 years of his career experience, he's been focused on scaling distributed systems. He noticed no one in Web3 was using the sharding technology that he had used in his Web2 career to scale in Web3. And so for the past 5 years, Omar and our team have been architecting and developing the most advanced sharding solution demonstrated yet in Web3. This is such a simple chart, but it's so important. You know, today, so many people in blockchain just think about what's the TPS capacity of a blockchain, and most chains today have a fixed TPS capacity. And as they become more popular, they run into they reach their throughput capacity and then start to face that rising gas fee challenge. Shardium introduces the term TPS per node. What we're able to demonstrate is that with each validator added to Shardium, we can increase the throughput capacity. This means we should always be able to keep our throughput capacity greater than demand, so we never have a queue of transactions that build up where users need to start bidding on gas fees. And this is achieved through something called dynamic state sharding. If you're not familiar with this sharding, the goal of sharding is to perform a function in parallel. So blockchains have 3 different functions: ordering transactions, voting on transactions, and settling transactions. And different types of sharding can perform different functions in parallel. State sharding performs all 3 functions in parallel. And so an example of sharding is this illustration here where I have a wallet, you have a wallet, and our friend has a wallet. And in an unsharded blockchain, every node stores all of the data for all of our wallets and processes every transaction sequentially from each of our wallets, which is really inefficient because as a chain like Bitcoin or Ethereum gets more validator nodes, they only get more decentralization and redundancy. But eventually you have enough redundancy, and what you really need is parallel processing. Now, with sharding, some nodes will store the data and process the transaction for my wallet. Some nodes will store the data and process transaction for your wallet, and some nodes will store the data and process transactions for our friend's wallet. And so now we have a sufficient amount of redundancy in each shard, but we also get parallel processing where we can increase the throughput capacity with each node added to the network. So one thing with the dynamic state sharding architecture that's really unique about Shardium is no one single validator node in our network covers the same range of address space. So you get an immediate increase in TPS capacity and parallel processing each time a new validator joins the network. So to recap, at Shardium, we're building an EVM-based layer 1. We're able to retain low fees no matter how many transactions there are because we can increase our throughput capacity with each validator. That achieves linear scalability. I think one of the biggest problems with sharding today is that the current sharded chains break atomic composability, where if you have a transaction that calls 2 different contracts or more on different shards, they're not able to process that transaction atomically and retain composability. They have to asynchronously execute the transaction, and as a result, most sharded blockchains break composability. There is one chain that has asynchronous composability, which limits what can be done with composability. Another really unique feature about Shardium is we've introduced the term auto-scaling, where if you're familiar with Bitcoin, Bitcoin comes to consensus on its difficulty level. Shardium similarly comes to consensus on the desired size of the network. So Shardium every 60 seconds is measuring its load, and based on the load of the network, it'll come to consensus on if it needs to add or remove validators from the network. We call this auto-scaling, where now the network can prioritize the most efficient number of nodes needed in the network to process the current demand at the lowest node rewards cost. And it can grow and shrink in size autonomously without any developer involvement. One of the final benefits of Shardium in features is low hardware requirements. Shardium is fully permissionless. The expected cost to run a validator node when our mainnet launches is only $50 to $100 a month to rent a dedicated server to operate a validator. So there's a high amount of people in the world that can afford this cost to run validators, and it's truly permissionless in the sense that no one needs to be delegated to stake and run a validator. Anyone in the world who can afford this validator can run it. Some of the other features and benefits we're excited about is that transactions in Shardium are ordered based on time, not gas fee. There is no fee market in Shardium. And now we don't have to commoditize the processing time anymore. We have fair processing, and we're able to do that because the network will never get congested because of this benefit of being able to increase our TPS capacity and having linear scalability. Another thing we're excited about is we don't have any MEV in Shardium. And what that means is that we charge the same gas price per byte of data in each transaction. So similar to a gas station in real life, you'll pay the same price per gallon as everyone else, but the cost of your transaction can vary depending on the amount of gas consumed. And so in Shardium, we charge the same price per byte of data, but the cost of a transaction can change based on the amount of data consumed. And this means that there's no front running or MEV involved in Shardium. There's so much excitement about Shardium in India and emerging markets around the world, and even just in Web3 as a whole. We're building really quickly. We've launched 2 testnets already this year and have acquired over 200,000 users on these testnets. We're the first and only team in the world to demonstrate dynamic state sharding and achieve linear scaling. And one of our testnets is currently live with dynamic sharding. This means that each node in the network is assigned to a unique range of address space. It retains atomic composability, so you can have a transaction that calls 2 different contracts on 2 different shards and process that transaction atomically and retain composability. We are currently hosting 5 to 10 meetups a month. We've hosted 10 meetups in the past 2 months. Our goal is to host 50 to 100 each month in different countries around the world. And in India, we've had over 700 participants at these meetups. Our core guiding principles at Shardium are to be open, collaborative, and community-driven. We don't believe that, if you want to prioritize decentralization, you should have a centralized entity operating, the blockchain. You should build it together as a community. And so, at Shardium, this is being built by the community in India from the ground up. We have over 50 contributors working together who have joined the ecosystem early because they see the potential for growth here and want to ride the wave of this growth and benefit from joining the ecosystem early. We have communities around the world that are focused on Shardium, promoting Shardium in their local markets. For example, this week I was viewing the website traffic and the geographies where users are coming from, and the largest geography of users on our website is in Nigeria at the moment. So it's really exciting to see, different emerging markets around the world get excited about our thesis of making decentralization affordable. We currently have over 15 dApps on our testnet. This is all organic. We haven't invested in any paid growth yet. We're just getting started there. And when our mainnet launches, we'll have over 100 applications. We're talking to some exciting applications who we have partnerships with that are unannounced. And so when mainnet launches, there will be a large ecosystem. There will be all the tier 1 developer tooling and infrastructure products integrated with Shardium, and some listings on exciting exchanges. Web3 is the best opportunity of our lifetime. I think everyone here is here today because we're all excited about decentralization. It's really exciting to think that for centuries the world has operated on centralized operating systems, and now in our lifetime we have the opportunity to play a role in building the decentralized operating system of our future. And so if you're not working full-time in Web3 today, if you're not investing in Web3 or working as an employee or a service provider, I really encourage you to get involved in the space. Shardium is a great ecosystem which you can join early and help build Web3 for the future with a chain that is focused on mainstream adoption and making decentralization affordable. If you're interested to get involved, just scan this QR code and follow us on socials. You can ping me on Discord. My name's Greg Hemmer. I'm the head of ecosystem. Again, we're very collaborative and want to grow as a community. We definitely plan to have a presence here in South Korea with investors like WeMade and WeMix and Foresight Ventures and their relationship with CoinNest. We'll be hosting hackathons, offering grants in the future, and working together to succeed and launch the first applications in Web3 that go mainstream. Thanks everyone so much for your time and hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you for your speech. 그레고리 해머님께 큰 박수 부탁드립니다. 이더리움을 필두로 시작된 레이어 1과 또 폴리곤으로 대표되는 레이어 2 영역에서는 이미 다양한 글로벌 플레이어들이 활발하게 경쟁을 해나가고 있는데요. 그중에서 EVM을 기반으로 낮은 가스피를 내세워 확장성 있는 플랫폼을 만들어가고 있는 샬디움의 흥미로운 노력을 살펴볼 수 있는 강연이었습니다.